but a 20-year wildlife gardener. She's created large and small habitat gardens certified by the National Wildlife Federation. In the process, she's made almost every mistake possible. As a result, she knows how to design habitat gardens for birds,
Never jingles.
they grow here,
One
how
post.
to grow them, and what not to
I
do.
put on a post.
Her articles on habitat gardening have been published in the San Antonio Express News, and her wildlife gardening talks draw folks from all over Texas. So I now turn it over to Kathleen.
Okay. Where did Kathleen go? I'm looking for her picture.
I'm not on here?
I'm sure you are. I just can't find you.
You're on mine.
Where are you?
Can you see the screen now?
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. I just couldn't find you with all the other folks. Okay, there you go. You're spotlighted.
Okay. So now let's get ourselves over to the slideshow and get ourselves on the road. And I'm so tickled to be talking to all of you.
Sorry, Kathleen. You've been
Ask
muted.
Kathleen to unmute herself.
I'm trying to find her. Where did she go? I can't find her name. Okay, here we go.
Okay, there we go. I am so
Sorry
sorry.
about that.
All right.
Go.
Okay. So now we're going to get ourselves on the road. Whoops. Well, for whatever reasons, we can't go back to the first slide. But that's okay. This is second slide, and that's good enough because by now you know my name. And I'm so tickled to be able to talk to you guys today because the more people who know about hummingbirds and know about the plants they like and know about feeding them and taking care of them, the more hummingbirds we will have. And so there you go. This is my personal religious creed, and now I'm preaching to the choir. So I wish I could hear an amen out there. But
Yes.
because I can't, I'm going to...
No slide. Your slide is not on my screen.
You can't see it?
No.
All right, let's try again. Mine says share screen. Now it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I press OK, but it's still green.
Wait a minute. Try it now.
Try share screen again?
Yes. I just made you co-host. Sorry.
Okay. Now can you see it?
It's coming up. Yes. There we are. There we are.
All right. So now we will start again from the beginning. Can everybody see?
Yes.
Okay. We didn't actually get to start from the beginning. Who knows why? But that's okay because this is a second screen and I still know what I'm going to say and I'm still happy to visit with all of you. One of the things I want you to know about this is that I took almost all the pictures in this program, both of the birds and of the plants. And so I really do know who comes here and I really do know how to do a hummingbird garden and what grows here. And so I know that every plant in this program will grow where you live. Not only that, I'm going to tell you the magic secret to almost 100% success in your gardening, and you won't hear this anywhere else. So don't go away. And then I want to ask before we get started, everybody, did you download your plant list spreadsheet? And if you didn't, quick download it and print it because this spreadsheet has all the plants in the program in the order of the program by common name, which is the way most of us talk about them, and also by scientific name. So we talk about them by common name, but we buy them by scientific name. And here's the reason why. If you look down that spreadsheet, you would see one called firecracker bush. Well, firecracker bush is a guaranteed fire attractor. And not only that, deer seldom eat it, and it's hardy, and it's drought tolerant. It's evergreen most years. I mean, it's hard to find a better thing if you have the space for it. But there are 5 different species of plants called firecracker bush. So if you just go in and say, I want a firecracker bush, you may or may not get the one that the hummingbirds want. So you need to buy, as I pull my little sheet out and look for firecracker bush, Russellia rotundifolia. And if you take your little spreadsheet with you that you marked on, you'll be able to do that. Okay, so now we've gotten all of that through. We're going to do what every good speaker does and every good teacher does. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say, and then I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to tell you what I said. So by the end of that, you probably got it all, maybe better than I have it. So we're going to talk about the hummingbirds. We're going to talk about which birds are we most likely to see. How do we tell the males and talk about the differences between males and females. We're going to talk about how do we tell the different kinds of birds apart. And we're going to talk about where do they come from and where do they go when they're not here. And then we're going to talk about feeding. So what do they like to eat and what do we do with feeding them? And then we'll talk about habitat, which is how do you keep a good yard for a hummingbird? What will attract them? And keys to the kingdom in terms of gardening and in terms of design. How do you make it pretty? How do you make it work for the hummingbirds and the prettiest for you? And then after that, we're finally going to get to the plants, which is why most of you probably thought you were tuning into this to start with. But I promise you, you're going to be really happy you waited, because in amongst all of those plants, there are, I think, 6, you can count them and tell me if I'm wrong, different plants where I captured the hummingbirds feeding on the flowers. You will have to really look for some of them, but they're there and it'll be really fun to see. So now that we've done all of that, let's get going. So the first ones we're going to talk about are the black-chin hummingbirds, and they get to be first in line because we see them for the longest period of time. Black-chin hummingbirds not only migrate through, but they roost and breed and rear young here. And the hummingbird may have, depending on when it gets here, it may have up to 3 broods. So they may have 3 different sets of hatches here. That's quite an increase to the hummingbird population. That's not every year. Some years it's only 2, but even so, that's a big deal. And that's why we see them so much longer. And by the way, that's why we see so many more females than males. So when you look at the screen and you look at the bird on the right, he's the guy with the little black head. And you see, squint now so you can see it really well. So you see that little beautiful little purple flash under his chin? That's called a gorget. And those gorget feathers, they're not colored. They're not purple, but they're reflective, and they only reflect purple light. So when he is at rest, he keeps his feathers tucked in. When he is aroused, or he's going for a female and showing off, or he's mad and he's going into combat with another hummingbird, or he's telling you to get away from his feeder, he will flash his gorget and you'll see that little purple there. And that's the same in many hummingbirds. We'll see that again with the rufous hummingbird, but a little bit different. So then on the left, you see the female. Well, she looks kind of drab, doesn't she? On the right, the rufous hummingbird looks much more exciting, maybe you would say. Well, the guys have to do, because they have to get the girls, but the girls get to make the decisions. Also, the female hummingbird sits on a nest. She would be a sitting duck if she really showed up in that tree. So her coloration is very much like the lichens and the spider webs that she uses to weave her nest. So she wants to be almost invisible on that branch, which is why she pulls off lichens from the same tree she's going to build her nest on, so that her nest will blend in with all the other stuff along the bark on there, so that she'll just be part of the tree. And then she's a buff coat on the underneath. Now, as to telling them apart from ruby-throated, which are the second most number of hummingbirds that we see and which look very much alike, to be honest, there are two easy ways. One is you see her perched. You see how long her wings are in proportion to her tail? Look at her tail. Do you see the fork on the bottom of her tail? No, you don't see it. It's because proportionately her wings are so long, they cover it. That's one tip. Then the other thing is, look how long her beak is in proportion to her head. That is a long beak. And that beak is, I will say, significantly longer than a ruby-throated hummingbird. But you know, sometimes 1/8 of an inch is a significant difference, as it was the time that I had a new house that I renovated, and I was having my stove put in, and the tile guy put an extra layer of tile there, and 1/8 of an inch kept me from being able to put my stove into the place where he put it, because the space it went to and was meant to go in. So 1/8 of an inch, sometimes in your life, it counts for a lot, and it does with these hummingbirds. Okay, now what do hummingbirds eat? And this goes for basically all hummingbirds. Hummingbirds eat, depending on the time of year and depending on whether it's breeding season and where they are, they eat a proportion of small flying insects, because flying insects have protein and everybody needs protein. And when they are rearing young, the babies need protein to grow. You have to have protein to build bones and muscles and grow feathers. Nectar is sugar. Sugar is carbohydrate. Carbohydrate fuels energy. Hummingbirds use a lot of energy, but when they're growing, they have to have a lot of protein. And then they feed on nectar. And the nectar is, as we just said, is the carbohydrate that gives them the energy. So that explains to you why they migrate. Because in winter, how many flowers do we have blooming? And how many little flying insects like gnats and mosquitoes and such, how many of those do we have? Well, we don't have that many, so they have to go where they are. That explains the black-chin hummingbirds, and then we go to the ruby-throated hummingbirds. Now look at that male on the right. Look at his beautiful red gorget. You can really see that, can't you? So that, for the males, that's a tip-off. At least it is if their heads aren't all black. His feathers are just the same, but they reflect red. But he's seated. Look at him. Look down his tail. You see the forked tail, don't you? It's because his wings are proportionately smaller, shorter than the black chins. They don't go all the way down his tail. They don't cover his tail up like the black chins do. So that's one tip. If you see a seated hummingbird and you're torn between these two, and you can see that little forked tail, you know that's a ruby throat. Now that's what works for where we live. But if you were in Arizona in the valley where there's 14 different species, there'd be other things to think about. But for now, this is good enough for us. Now look at the female hummingbird on the left, and look at her beak, and look at the male's beak. Do you see that it is shorter than the black chins was? I know, it's hard to tell, it's hard to see, but if you put a hummingbird feeder up on your back porch or outside the window to your breakfast table, and you sit at your breakfast table and you watch them every day of the summer, you will learn to tell the difference, and you won't have to strain to do it, because your brain is more amazing than you will ever know. And the right side of your brain, which is the side that processes music and art and makes associations, it will make that association for you. And one day you will look and you will just know without even thinking about it. So the ruby-throated hummingbirds, they only migrate through. They migrate through in the spring, and they migrate through in the fall, and they migrate through for the reasons that we talked about before, because they have grounds where they need to breed and feed and so forth, and then they have wintering grounds. And then we have rufous hummingbirds. Now, at the beginning of this program, I had asked them to put the survey up for them, and I want to thank the administrators right now, because Candy, Betty, Bill, and Mary Jane, they did a fabulous job. They worked so hard on that. It was the first survey they'd done, and they had to do it over and over because I changed things, and I'm sorry. But one of the things we ask is, do you feed hummingbirds? And 80 some odd % of you said yes. Right on. Now, I noticed that at least one person said, I feed them through native plants. And I want to say to you, right on, because you don't ever have to go out and change that depending on how you've structured your garden. You're always going to have things there to attract the birds. So regardless of how you do it, that's fabulous. And that gives the hummingbirds a greater chance of survival, and it gives you the pleasure of seeing them. And I also asked, let's see. Oh, I asked whether you had seen a rufous hummingbird in your yard. This in front of you right now is a rufous hummingbird. Now I want you to know that I had lived in the Texas Hill Country for 4 years, I think, before I ever saw a rufous hummingbird. And I also want you to know that I've been a birder for a very long time, longer than I admit. But all of the books, none of them show rufous hummingbirds where we are now. They don't show them in New Braunfels. They certainly don't show them in your area because you're north of here. However, the books don't know everything, and the birds decide what they're going to do. Rufous hummingbirds have become more and more frequent here. You have a possibility of seeing them in migration. They do sometimes come through, and very early in migration when they do come through. And by the way, the males and the females, they look the same. You won't really, it won't be easy to tell. There are a few small differences, but we're not going to get into them because that's in the too hard category at the moment. And I did see one in my yard last week. She was here one day. The time you will see them most is in the winter. They will come and overwinter here in this region. Now, people who live on the edges of a community are more likely to see them, and I don't have a good explanation for that because most hummingbirds are adapted to towns and gardens, but rufous hummingbirds seem to show up more toward the countryside. But the typical time period when you would see a rufous hummingbird would be mid-December to mid-March. They will leave pretty much almost the same day that the first black-chinned male arrives from Central America coming back to his breeding grounds. They split it up very neatly. And so the rufous hummingbird will go back up north. So now, where did they come from and where did they go? Okay, this is the black-chinned hummingbird range map. I want you to squint really well and look at it so that you can see, because I know that that's probably not going to be very big. I hope you're not watching on a phone. You'll never see it. You go blind. But the orange there, all that orange is breeding ground. That's pretty amazing into it. And look, if you look down on there, you see that we are in their breeding ground, but look how far up it goes. It goes all the way up to Canada. That's a large breeding ground. And then when you look at the blue down below, which goes along the western coast of Mexico and down into Central America, that's their wintering ground. Now the purple, where it says non-breeding, that means that some may stay there year-round. Winters are hard for them. They're not as adapted to it here, so you will seldom see them, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. So what I would say to you is, if you have any evidence at all that there's a hummingbird in your area in the winter, put your feeder back up. And if it's one of those rare days or nights that it freezes, bring your feeder in at night so you can put it back in its liquid form in the daytime. Now the rufous hummingbird and the ruby-throated hummingbirds, they have very different breeding grounds. And it makes sense because when you look at that map, you'll say to yourself, oh, most of the orange is most of that tan is where the orange was for the black chin. So the hummingbirds have split this up so that everybody kind of has their own region. And the ruby-throateds breed in the north and northeast, although there is a section goes all the way across toward the far north, almost all the way across the country, and it goes all the way south. And that little yellow strip, that's where both, that ruby-throats breed there, but that's a rufous wintering ground. So that's the area that's recognized that rufous might winter. But when you look at that map, you won't see us, any of us, on their wintering grounds, even though I've just told you they're here, and you have my picture as proof. Then when you look down, the purple is where the rufous goes south to winter. So if you look from south to north, how far that little bird has to fly, and what if you were a young male of the last clutch of the summer, and you were born in late July, and you were only 6 to 8 weeks old when you had to make that very long 1,000-mile migration, would you stop in Central Texas if you found a place that had the plants and someone who hung a feeder out? Because thinking about how cold it might get in Alaska on an Alaska night, you might think you could live there. You could do that through the winter, and you would be right. Rufous hummingbirds go into something called torpor. Torpor is when the bird's heart rate slows way, 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 way down. It slows to a near, it's not stopped, but it slows so far down that it conserves energy. So the bird doesn't shiver. It just folds its wings, and it's almost like it's in a coma. So that's what the birds do at night to survive when it's really cold. If you have a feeder out, at first light, they will wake up and they will be looking for food because they will then need the energy. So that's why we are important for that. Also, there are plants that are important. I did have my very first sighting of a rufous hummingbird ever was on December 31st of one year. And I had a plant in my front. It was a mild winter and it was still blooming. And the rufous hummingbird came to that blooming plant. I never would have known. And of course, as soon as I saw that, we hung the feeder out, and we had year-round feeders then for the next 4 years, because that's how long we had hummingbirds. So it's a really cool thing. And now you know who they are and what they like, where they came from, and where they're going. So now we're going to get just a little bit more specific. So the black chins, that says March 10th. That's March 10th in New Braunfels. And you might see them a little bit earlier. You're north of here into October. Occasionally overwintering. And I want you to know that is really occasionally. That is not typical. And we're going to talk, and I want to just say really quickly, the ruby-throateds then will go through from, they will go south. They will start going south. You will see the first ones at the beginning of August. Because remember how far north some of them are? Some of them are in Maine. Well, that's a long way. And so they have to, and they have a long way to get down. So the earliest ones are beginning of August, and the latest ones will be late September typically. And the rufous we've already talked about. So now we're going to talk about how can we attract them to our yards, and that's habitat. You heard me say that I had a plant in my yard that attracted them in December. And that's not this plant. This one is Salvia gregii, which is one of the questions. How many of you grow Salvia gregii? And the reason I ask that is that Salvia gregii is on our list, and it is perhaps the most common plant that anyone uses, and it is the easiest thing to grow. It's evergreen, drought tolerant, deer don't eat it. It requires very little care. It doesn't have bug problems. And it will bloom some years 9 months a year. That's hard to get better than that. So this is a little area of Salvia greggii on there, but we're going to see it farther in the thing. So talking about habitat, there is good news. Most of the plants that you plant for habitat are perennials. If you are a lazy gardener, how many of us are lazy gardeners? I am. You only plant it once. Maybe it'll die back in the winter, but it'll come back in the spring. You may have to cut it back, wait it for years. That's so much easier than sowing seeds every year. Now in this picture, you will see that there are multiple hummingbird plants in it. So if you look at the back of the picture, you can see that that's Pride of Barbados. And look at those pretty colors. The little smaller red flowers, that's Turk's cap. And then even coming forward, you see the blueberries, that's beautyberry. Beautyberry doesn't have a flower that feeds them, but beautyberry is a really good host for little bitty flying gnats. So you will often find, and then at the very bottom, you see firebush, Hamelia patler flower. So there we are in one picture, 4 different kinds. And when you think about your garden, as we go through and look at the pictures, you can think about doing layers. As much as people like layer cakes, you have the icing on the end and they're all good and you like them all and they're perfect in their place. Same thing in doing a garden. You can just do a layer cake garden. Okay, so let's talk about the kind of plants we need then. We need trees or bushes for shelter, for nesting, and for small insects. And now I bet everybody knows what this little thicket is. And so anyway, this is ash juniper, also known as dam cedar. And I know that people hate it, but I want you to know it is not the female trees you hate. The female trees have berries. It's the male trees. They're the ones who puff those clouds of pollen into the air to fertilize the flowers of the female trees. Nevertheless, it's an evergreen, and evergreens are one of the important things. If you don't have evergreens around where you live, if you can plant an evergreen bush or tree, it will give shelter. It gives shelter from storm, it gives shelter from animals, it gives shelter from bigger birds, so it's an important thing. Then we need tubular flowers for nectar. Now I've already talked up this spreadsheet and you've already downloaded it and printed it out, and I'm going to tell you that flower right there, it's not on that spreadsheet. It does attract hummingbirds, but you only have so much room. And so there we go. So I'm just going to tell you what it is. And if you like it, write it down. It's desert willow. And desert willow, and that one you can buy by the common name. So desert willow is a small, ferny kind of tree, likes full sun, drought tolerant. Do fence the bottom of it from deer because they won't eat it, but the bucks will rub their antlers and wreck it. But those flowers that come after it rains have a heavenly scent. They're beautiful, and the hummingbirds love them. And how cool is that, that you can put a small tree in your yard that gives you what you need for that. So now we're going to talk about feeding. Now we've already talked about bugs, and we've talked about flower nectar. Now we're going to talk about your hummingbird nectar. And this bird that we see at this feeder is a black chin female. And I bet you already figured that out because you looked at the length of her beak. And you knew it was a female because she does not have a black head. And just a note, you can use almost any kind of hummingbird feeder. Some feeders are easier to manage than others because bees also like nectar. So some feeders make it easier for the bees to get into, and that's kind of an issue. However, this one has bee guards. Is that good? Maybe. It depends. If the raccoon comes along at night and takes that out and throws it on the ground and one of those little plastic things breaks, then the bees can get into there. Guess how I know that? And so if you have raccoons that come in your neighborhood, you might have to take your hummingbird feeder in at night. That's just a hint. So a variety of feeders work. And you remember we were talking about bees? Now look at that little male ruby-throated. He's aggravated. Look at how big his gorget is. He is not happy that those bees are all over his feeder. Sometimes when they do that and they get close and they fan, ooh, sorry, I rocked the screen. They fan their wings like that, the bees will back off. But if the bees are really hungry, they won't. And that'll make him not so happy. But there are other feeders. There are flat feeders that they can poke their little beaks down into, and those are really good for not having the bees be able to get into it. And the feeder that is a gift to the 21st or whatever participant is one that's a good one for bees too, for not having them come in. Okay, so now we're going to talk about feeding, and I'm not sure if the page that had the food recipe got to you or not. So here's the directions. I'm going to ask you a question. You can answer silently if you don't want to shout in your house. Either way is fine with me. So how many of you can boil water? Usually I ask for a show of hands. I have never had a program where I did not have 100% participation. So I am hoping that all of you have raised your hand and said you can boil water. If you can boil water, you can make hummingbird food. All you do is you bring your water to a boil, you add your sugar, you stir it. When it goes clear, as it does in just a few seconds, you take it off and let it cool. That's it. Then you put it in a thing in the refrigerator, and then you keep it so that it's ready when you need to clean out your hummingbird feeder and put new food in it. Now, we need to talk about the formula. Up there it says 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. Well, I often tell people an easy way to do it is to make a quart at a time. So a quart is 4 cups. So you boil 1 quart of water and you dump your 1 cup of white sugar, and that's the only thing to put in there. No brown sugar, no honey, no low-cal, no nothing. That's the only thing to put in there. Not only that, don't put red food coloring in there. It's not good for the birds and it's not needed to attract them. So why risk a problem? Okay, there we go. One last thing. Where we live, it's hot. I don't know how many 100-degree days you had in August, but in New Braunfels, we only had 3 days that topped out in the 90s. Every other day was 100 or more. That food, it starts to go bad very quickly. So every 2 days at least, you bring that feeder in, you dump whatever's left in there out. So don't fill a whole quart up if you don't have a quart's worth of hummingbird traffic. Just put a smaller amount in. So you dump it out, you run hot water through it, you make sure that the feeder isn't cloudy, and then you take your bottle out of the refrigerator from your quart and you put some more in, you hang it back out. And so you're not making hummingbird food all the time. You're just making it whenever you run out. Now, if you are one of those very lucky people who has done everything right and you are on the gravy train hummingbird route and you need to have 5 feeders out and you have to make 1 gallon today, I am so jealous. But if you make 1 gallon a day, then you will just put 4 cups of sugar and 4 quarts of water in and make your gallon. Okay. So how can we attract them to our yards? Water for bathing. All right, I'm going to admit this is bragging. You don't have to build a waterfall as you see on the left. Now, I want you to look at that little bird with the black head. So automatically we know it's one of 2 of the species we see here. So we know it's either a black chin or a ruby-throated. And now how are we going to tell? Well, let's look at his beak. Boy, is that a long beak. If that is a long beak, what is he? Black chin. There we go. And do you see in that little waterfall that my husband built me for my birthday one year? Look at how the water gently sheets. He would fly down there and he would flap his wings. Not only that, this was the most fun I ever had. It was when I lived in the house where I had that in the backyard. Every morning at 8 a.m., I'd take my coffee and my jammies and I'd sit on the back porch and the hummingbirds would be lined up and circling. There was a rule, only one hummingbird at the time, evidently, on the flat rock, because as soon as that one would leave, the next one would come along, and it was usually a 3-deep line. Is that too cool or what? Now on the right, you see that's a little female black chin. Look how long her beak is and how long her wings are. And that's a fountain. So we moved to the suburbs from the country where I had the waterfall and I had a fountain. And who knew if you have a round fountain, if it's flattish at the top, oh, they're going to come to it. Do you have to do that to get a hummingbird in your yard? Oh, no. Oh, you don't have to do any of that. If you just hang a feeder out and don't do anything else, hummingbirds will come to your yard. But every bird needs a bath. They need to get their feathers cleaned. It's not just that it feels good. They need to get off dust. They need to get off mites. So it's a good thing if you can do it. If you can't do either of those things, you can get a little mister and you can run it over the bird bath. I know you all have regular bird baths for a little bit, and you put a little stand there and the hummingbirds will come and they'll sit on the little stand in the mister, or they'll fly through it. So you can bring them to your yard that way, and it's more fun than you can imagine. So now getting to the habitat making part of it after we've gotten past the water. This is Pride of Barbados, and you know, we saw that before in that one picture that had 4 different plants. Look how big that grows. That grows really big and not very long. Deer don't eat it, and we're going to see that later in the program. So here are the keys to designing a hummingbird gardening. Remember we talked about layer cake and different things in layers? So you want to have a variety of plants. So some things grow low, some things grow tall, some things grow in between. There are vines, there are trees, there are little low bushes. There are even annuals like zinnias. You want to have mass, and mass means if you go after variety and you have one plant of 4 different kinds together, well, that is a form of mass, but they may or may not bloom in sync, and it may be harder for the birds to find them. If you can put 3 plants of the same thing or 5 plants of the same thing, then it's easier for the birds to find them. So mass is an attractor. And then bloom timing. And so why is bloom timing important? Because we already know different birds are here at different times, and we already know they start in March, and some of them go into December or later. And so how do we have something blooming all that time? Well, that's part of variety. Different things bloom at different times, but we plan that. We look at our yards and we look at what we want to do, and we think, how can I have something planting during spring, something blooming in spring migration, something blooming in the summer when the breeding birds are here, and something blooming in fall for the fall migration. And so you go down that spreadsheet and you use other resources like Ladybird Wildlife Center's plant database is fabulous. And you see, when do these things bloom? And you plant those. But I've made it really easy for you with these plants. And by the way, the plants on this spreadsheet, they are not the be all and end all. I had to edit myself. I could have done another page of this happily. In my little small 1/5 of an acre yard now, I have 30 different species of hummingbird plants. So I know you can do it even in a little small space. Now, you remember I told you that I was going to tell you the secret to success in gardening. And I know that 56% of you said you were gardeners. So this is it. This is the gold standard. This is everything you need to know. Plant it where it wants to grow. If you do that, if you plant it where it wants to grow, you are 99% going to succeed in your garden and with your plantings. So what does that mean? For the 44% of you who are not yet gardeners, that means what kind of sun does that plant need? Does it need full sun, part shade, full shade? What kind of water? Does it need wet, moist, well draining, or really dry? What kind of soil does it need? Now, soil is a misnomer for what many of us have. What many of us have is an inch of clay over limestone, unless we imported a whole lot of stuff. But there are plants that will grow in almost anything. So that means, is this sandy? Is this loam? Loam is that beautiful friable stuff that you wish you could dig in, but you can't. You have to have a pickaxe in order to dig where you live because you have clay and limestone. Or clay, which is dense and condenses, or caliche, which is a kind of rocky rubble. And for anyone who has deer issues, you have deer resistance. Now, I know that deer are an issue for some of you. So on the spreadsheet, I have put a column for deer resistance. If it says that it's deer resistant, what does that mean? It means that typically it's deer resistant. It actually says minimal, moderate. They eat the flowers, or yes, it's deer resistant. But what we all know, everyone who has lived through any time here in really, really bad years, deer will eat anything, almost anything, even if they hate it. If you hate liver and you would not eat it for anything, you would probably still eat it to save your life. So that's the case sometimes. But this is not a deer program, although I do give one of those. This is not that. And so we're not talking more about that. Now look at this picture. This is another picture of a bunch of really pretty plants together at different levels that are hummingbird plants. If you look at the bottom, you'll see that there is, what is that? On the right is flame acanthus, or hummingbird bush. You see the little red tubular flowers at the bottom? And then on the left, boy, I need to get bifocals or something. I'd like to say that's Salvia gregii, but I'm not positive about that. And then you see that agave. Agaves put up flowers that flower in the summer when the breeders are here, sometimes often in the spring, and the birds love them, the hummingbirds do. And then in the back you see Esperanza. Remember we asked the question about how many of you grow Esperanza, and it was 18% or something. That's the yellow bells. But look at all of that, all drought tolerant, all full sun, all in the same area, and layer cake gardening. We have low, we have medium, we have high. Oh, yes. So we keep our cats indoors. Cats are the #1 killer of hummingbirds, domestic cats, killer of hummingbirds in the US. This is from the Audubon Society. Now, right there, you see my sweet Ernest in his basket in front of the window, and that's firecracker bush right outside there. So if you have a cat, and I do, I have 2 cats, I love them, they're indoor cats. And you say, I can't keep my cat from going outside, it's not fair. Well, you just give that cat some kitty TV. You put plants and bird feeders or waterers outside your window, and you give that cat a basket and a place to vicariously enjoy what goes on and to hunt through the window. And Ernest spent many afternoons there, and we're going to see that firecracker bush later on from outside. Another really important thing is to limit pesticides. And this is not some do-gooder thing. This is a very practical and real expression of what you need to do to protect the birds. Pesticides that can kill insects can sicken the birds. They also contaminate the water that's around your garden. They can contaminate the plants and the soil. So what do I mean when I say pesticides? The worst offender are those aerial sprays. I don't know if any of you do mosquito sprays in your yard, but when you do mosquito sprays, you are guaranteeing you are not going to have, butterflies are not going to survive in your yard. It's going to kill the caterpillars for them. You're going to kill not only mosquitoes, you're going to kill gnats and flies, you're going to kill spiders. And what was it that we remembered that hummingbirds had to have a percentage of their diet of? Gnats, flies, and mosquitoes. And what the babies have to survive. So mosquito sprays are not the answer. The answer, if you have mosquitoes, is eliminate all the standing water. And if you have standing water that you can't eliminate, like you have a fountain, a recirculating fountain, put some of those little mosquito bits into it. The mosquito, if you don't have any fish in there, mosquito bits are not going to hurt anything. And they're not going to hurt the birds, and the birds even take baths in it. And what happens is the larva won't hatch. So there won't be more flying mosquitoes. Put it in the base of your, if you have pots and saucers and water stands in saucers. First off, you're watering plants too much. You have water standing in saucers all the time. But outside of that, put little bits in the saucers so that you don't have that problem. And remember that hummingbirds use spider webs in order to build their nest, because the nests have to expand, because those eggs, they're tinier than the white part of my fingernail here. They're tiny. And those little birds hatch and they grow. And so the nest has to expand with the birds. And so spider webs let them do that. So this is an important part of that. And finally, we are getting to the plants. And this is the part everybody really likes. So when you look at your spreadsheet, you will see that this spreadsheet, it's not in alphabetical order. One would think that somebody who wants to teach you would put it in alphabetical order. Well, it's in the kind of plant order. So we have vines first. We're starting with vines. And in each section, it's in alphabetical order. But you all have Google. You can look anything up. So I'm really not worried about you. Now that picture is coral honeysuckle. And that's the native honeysuckle. And that's the only honeysuckle you want to plant. The reason for that is that is the one that the birds evolved to live with. Look how long those, let's go to see it a little closer. Look how long those tubular flowers are. And by the way, those tubular flowers are wider than all of those hybrids. You do not get as much nectar in the hybrids. Now, that's a gorgeous big flush, isn't it? That is the one and only plant that I know that will be blooming in March when the hummingbirds come, reliably. Every year for the 14 years I've had it, that plant is blooming when the hummingbirds come. So if you want something for the hummingbirds the first day they show up in March, put yourself up an arbor or buy one and grow coral honeysuckle on it. Now, I will tell you, I had my husband build me that arbor for the year after I had him build me the waterfall for my birthday. So that was my birthday after that. And then the year after that, he asked, can we go to the jewelry store instead? But anyway, and this is also what I call a twofer plant. When the flowers are done, then in years with enough rain, berries form and other birds come and eat the berries. So mockingbirds, cardinals, cedar waxwings, even eastern phoebes, all kind of birds come for the berries. How cool is that? You can do double duty. Oh, by the way, it's hard to see, but if you look on that right-hand screen at that picture and you look down at the bottom of where the vine comes out, you'll see, if you have really good eyes, that there's a green wire fence around the base of that. That's because if you do not cover that, the deer will eat it. So you need to make sure they're not eating the base of your vine. Later on, your vine will grow up and they will not reach the top of it. They just can't reach the bottom of it. Cross vine. Also, this is evergreen. So cross vine. Crossvine is also thinly evergreen. It also blooms in the spring, but it's later in the spring. And look at those big tubular flowers. Are they gorgeous or what? And that's very drought tolerant. And then trumpet vine. A trumpet vine often blooms in the fall. So here you go. You've got the early spring and you've got the fall just in the vine column. And these vines are gorgeous, but I want to tell you this in all seriousness. I have this from the mouth of the best plant guy in Central Texas. A trumpet vine will grow 10 feet longer than anything you grow it on. So you do not want to grow this on a tree, up an arbor on your house, onto your porch, unless you want it to grow around your porch and up your chimney. You want to grow this on some freestanding something so that it can grow up, and then when the vines grow out farther, it'll look like an umbrella and be really pretty. Deer eat this, make sure you fence the bottom of it. All right, so we're going to move on to flowers and bushes, and here we go. This is autumn sage, Salvia gregii, and you have already heard all about that, but look how many flowers there are there. This is also a sage, big red sage. And by the way, when we talk about sages, typically deer don't eat them. Deer don't like pungent things and things with an aroma. Unfortunately, they make an exception for big red sage. So big red sage, you see the plant on the right, and then on the left, you see the tubular red flowers. And then those little brown things, those are seed pods. So this is another twofer plant. That is Baltimore Oriole, male, and he's there to eat the seeds. So it has something for birds both at the same time, and it blooms for a very long time. So if you put this in, it needs to have a little fence around it, and it needs a little bit more water and soil than most others. But this one was thought to be extinct. And then a botanist found one plant in Blanco County, took some seeds, took them to Ladybird Wildflower. He propagated, they propagated, and now you can obtain this in a number of native plant nurseries and often in the Native Plant Society in your community. And also it will reseed. That's how I got mine. I got mine from a friend, and I have given them since and transplanted that way. Okay, cardinal flower. I'm going to confess, I told you they were perennials. This is an annual, but it grows so readily from seed. And I told you they were all easy, and this one is finicky. But does anybody see the hummingbird on this picture? Anybody see her? The female black chin with her beak into the flowers. You will see hummingbirds all the time you have this. So here's what you have to do. If you want to grow cardinal flower, make yourself a big pot or a raised bed right by your porch. It only wants morning sun, so you can have some shade there. That's great. And then, because almost everybody goes on their porch almost every day, I mean, where else are we going these days? You can hand water that even during watering restrictions when you're not running your sprinkler. So you can water it regularly and it will bloom for months, and the hummingbirds will love it. And not only that, that thing will reseed. So you can have it again if you just prepare the bed and keep it that way. And it's worth that. And besides that, there's that picture. This is cedar sage. I would like to know how many of you have ash juniper in your yards. Damn cedar, you remember. Maybe you have eradicated everything from your yard, but everybody knows that ash juniper is dense, and it's dry under there, and it's shady, and look at that, it's blooming, dry shade, and deer don't eat it. Evergreen, makes a ground cover. Is that cool? And it's a nice low growing plant. Okay, coral bean, and I'm looking at my watch and it is 3:25. Am I out of time? Have I talked too long? Betty, nod your head. Yes,
No,
or
you're not out of time. You've got at least 5 more minutes.
oh, well, we're going to speed through this. You're at the north end of this, and this is deciduous. This is firebush, which will die back in the winter, but it's a wonderful plant because it wants to bloom in August when nothing else does. So in the worst scorch, this is blooming. This is the firecracker bush that has little bitty flowers, but it blooms like crazy. And then flame acanthosis dies back, but and this will reseed itself prolifically. So if you don't want to pull them up, don't put that there. Pineapple sage, you remember that I told you that there was a plant that attracted the rufous hummingbirds? On the left is that very plant. And then on the right, do you see the hummingbird at the pineapple sage? Red columbine. You might have thought that didn't grow here because the second name on that is canadensis, but it does, and it's gorgeous, and it's evergreen year round, and it wants to bloom in the shade. How cool is that? Do deer eat it? Yes. Red yucca, deer eat the flowers. I bet a lot of you have red yucca. Standing cypress grows from seed. It's a biennial, which means you get a basal rosette the first year, and then you have a tall spire. But it reseeds readily, and so you always have something in the ground. And then I know you see the hummingbird on the left, and this one is Texas Bethany. Low growing, deer don't eat it, evergreen, drought tolerant, part sun. Tropical sage dies back in the winter. Turk's cap blooms in the shade. Now this is a big bush, it dies back, and that's a Gulf fritillary butterfly. That's flowering senna. It's not in your spreadsheet. Okay, does everybody see the hummingbird in this one? Female black chin. Look right through the most prominent flowers there, and you can see her at the back. That's non-native. Most of these are native because that's what the hummingbirds evolved for, but this does provide habitat, and it is evergreen and pretty. Esperanza that we talked about earlier with the yellow bells, they don't have to have red. They like other colors if they're right shape. And this one is blooming right now almost everywhere, Mexican bush sage. It blooms spring and fall. So there you go, you have spring and fall. And is that gorgeous or what? It dies back in the winter. Mexican oregano, and I know you see that because that's the picture that was at the beginning that we didn't get. So there we go. That's evergreen, deer don't eat it, drought tolerant, and hummingbirds love her. And that blooms 6 months out of the year. So Pride of Barbados we talked about before. Pink Texas skullcap is another good low-growing mounding plant that's really good for bordering and having in front, and has lots of flowers, and bumblebees love that. And this is zinnias. So if you're going to plant annuals in the summer, plant zinnias because you'll have bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. So how do we attract them to our yards? Habitat, food, water, easy. Do we have time for any questions?
Oh, yes, we always have time for questions. And what's so great about your presentation is we had such good audience participation. Many of the questions, people answered. And so let's see where we were. Y'all all realize the spreadsheet is in the invitation. So once you get off, if you didn't have a chance to download it, you can. And let's see, 62 in attendance. And somebody wanted to know, is it okay to stir the sugar in cold water till dissolved? And somebody was saying on here that it doesn't have to be boiling water, they're saying now. That I believe that was Karen McBride from our Audubon Society. So, but what do you think about dissolving the water in hot water, dissolving the sugar in hot water? Do you think that would be?
I think sometimes good is good enough, but I like best. Best is hot water.
Okay, okay. And has anyone seen a hummingbird nest? I don't know, I haven't. And then Karen from the Audubon Society said that rufous are here all winter, sometimes 15 or more individual birds in Sun City from December to February.
Oh, that's so cool. You guys are lucky.
I know, so we are, we're taking really good care of our hummingbirds. And they said that
keep your feeders out.
Yes, apparently. And Martin said to prune back salvia 2/3 in the winter, and then once again in spring, and after they bloom about 1/3 to get the most flowering. And Karen had a suggestion. She said, hang your feeders in the shade and the bees will not be a problem. So that might be good. And I'm kind of going through these kind of quickly. Can you give too much sugar to hummers? Well, of course, just like you can to people, don't do that. And y'all, if you're looking at your questions, if you see something else, let me know. It's looking like that's pretty much all I'm seeing. Kathleen, we have really enjoyed your program and want to thank you so much for being with us. And so I think now we're going to go back to Bill.
Can I say one more
Sure,
thing?
sure, go ahead.
Okay, here's the one more thing. I give 3 other programs. So if you like this one, tell them you want the one on gardening for birds, or the one on landscaping, avoiding deer damage in the landscape, or the one on how you do small space gardening.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And we're going to go back to Bill, and we really appreciate, she's a great friend of ours. So thank you again for being here with us. Thank you. And everybody loved your presentation.